Have you ever wondered if a strange, confusing, or seemingly meaningless dream could be more than just fleeting images in your mind? Have you ever woken up from a dream with your heart racing, feeling that something deeper was happening in the unseen? If you've ever felt this way, let me tell you that what you're about to hear is no ordinary story. You didn't end up here by accident. What happened to our protagonist carries a powerful and direct message for your life, and after hearing his story, you may begin to see your dreams with new eyes. So, I ask you to pay close attention, because the signs you will uncover in this story might hold the key you need to understand how God is speaking to you even through what seems to make no sense. In a small village nestled at the foot of the mountains of Judah, there lived a young man named Lemuel. Lemuel was no prophet, nor the son of a priest. He wasn't known for his wisdom or great feats. He was a humble farmer, like many in his village, dedicating his days to tending the land and caring for his family's animals. However, there was something peculiar about him that no one else seemed to notice. From his youth, Lemuel was a dreamer, not in the sense of someone with grand aspirations or ambitions, but literally every night without fail, he dreamed. And his dreams were often confusing and strange, seemingly devoid of meaning, or so he thought. One night, Lemuel had a dream unlike any other. In it, he was walking through an endless desert. The heat of the sun scorched his skin, and in the distance, he saw a river that seemed out of place amidst the sand. When he finally reached the river, instead of water, what flowed through its channel was liquid gold, bright, radiant, and blinding. Lemuel tried to approach it, but just as he was about to touch the river, it vanished, leaving him alone in the vast expanse of sand. He awoke drenched in sweat. What could this dream mean? Why was he dreaming of gold in the desert? He decided to dismiss it, thinking it was just another bizarre and meaningless image his mind had conjured. But the dreams continued, not always the same, but every night, something peculiar, something incomprehensible. Lemuel began to feel there was something more behind these dreams, but he didn't know who to turn to. There were no prophets in his village, and the elders always told him that dreams were merely reflections of one's thoughts and worries from the day. Still, Lemuel couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. One night, when the desert dream returned, he resolved to seek answers. He remembered that in a neighboring village lived an old wise man named Itan, known for his deep connection with God. Without hesitation, at dawn, Lemuel set out on a journey to find him. When he arrived, he shared all his dreams with Itan, especially the one about the river of gold in the desert. The elder listened in silence, his eyes closed as if in prayer while Lemuel spoke. When the young man finished, Itan opened his eyes and said, "Lemuel, what you see is not just a simple dream, it is a vision. God is speaking to you, but you are seeing things through the lens of confusion. The desert you see represents your own life, a life that currently feels empty of meaning. But the river of gold that appears is a promise. God is showing you that, though you cannot see it now, there are riches, spiritual blessings waiting to be discovered, blessings that come from above. But as in your dream, those blessings will not arrive if you only observe them from afar. You must take a step of faith, even when it seems like everything is disappearing before you." Lemuel was astonished. Was it possible that God was speaking to him through these dreams? He began to pray with greater fervor, asking for direction and understanding. Little by little, what had seemed meaningless began to make sense. The dreams were not literal messages but symbols pointing to something greater. One night, the dream changed. Instead of the desert, he saw a great harvest, a field full of golden wheat growing under a clear blue sky. In the center of the field, he saw a crystal clear spring of water that he hadn't noticed before. When he awoke, he understood that it was time to act. Lemuel decided to take the small, barren plot of land his family owned, a piece of land that had yielded little fruit until then, and plant again, this time with faith that God would bless him. Months passed, and what seemed like a desperate attempt to cultivate infertile land turned into a miracle. The barren ground flourished, and the harvest was abundant, much more than Lemuel or his family could have ever imagined. The river of gold in his dream, in the end, was not material wealth but God's blessing in his life in ways he had never imagined. Friend, perhaps like Lemuel, God has been speaking to you through dreams that seem to make no sense. Maybe you've had visions, impressions, or moments of deep reflection where you don't understand what God is trying to tell you. But I encourage you not to ignore those signs. Often, God uses the unexpected, the mysterious, to reveal his will. What at first seems confusing may actually be an invitation to trust Him more deeply, to seek His guidance, and to open your heart to what He has prepared for you. Pay attention to your dreams, to those moments of deep introspection, because God may be speaking to your life in ways you don't yet understand. What seems to lack meaning may be filled with divine significance, waiting for you to discover it. This story is not just a tale from ancient times. It's a reminder that God still speaks even today in ways we often overlook. And the most beautiful part is that when we finally begin to see with eyes of faith, what once seemed like a mystery becomes a clear and purpose-filled answer. If you've made it this far, I want to tell you it's no coincidence. Even if you don't believe it at this moment, the story you just heard carries a message that can profoundly transform your life. It's no accident that you've reached this point. In the next few minutes, I'll show you something that may seem astonishing. Like the story of Lemuel, the young man who didn't understand his dreams, reflects in many ways what you may be experiencing today. If you keep listening, you'll realize that the signs God used to speak to him are also present in your life, waiting for you to recognize them. If you're here, know that this message has been designed to touch the deepest parts of your heart. Don't stop now, because what you're about to hear could be the answer to questions you've carried inside for a long time. Now, let's think. There comes a moment for Lemuel, and just like him, many of us sometimes feel lost, without direction, unsure of what God is trying to tell us through the circumstances we face. Perhaps, like Lemuel, we have experienced moments where we sense that God is speaking to us, but what we see or dream doesn't make sense. It's possible that you found yourself in the midst of a spiritual drought, wondering if God is still present, if His purpose for your life is still valid. Lemuel's story shows us that even when everything seems confusing, God is still at work. Lemuel dreamed of a desert and a river of gold, but he didn't understand what it meant. How many times have we had moments where we don't comprehend what God is doing in our lives? Sometimes we go through spiritual desert seasons where we feel exhausted, without answers, without direction. Perhaps you feel like you're in a desert right now. Maybe you've reached a point in your life where you wonder if there's really something more, if God still has a plan for you. And here's where I want to remind you of something important. Asterisk, the deserts are not the end. Asterisk, they are the place where God forges His work within us. God showed Lemuel a river of gold in the middle of the desert, but that gold wasn't just material. It represented the spiritual blessings that were to come, the riches God has prepared for those who trust in Him, even when circumstances seem unfavorable. And you know what? That same river of blessings is available to you. It doesn't matter how old you are or how many times you've felt like you've lost your way. If God could make Lemuel's desert flourish, He can also make yours flourish. You might think that you've spent too much time waiting, that your life can no longer change in a meaningful way. But remember, Lemuel was not a prophet or someone of great importance, just a young farmer. God doesn't require you to be extraordinary in the eyes of the world to speak to you or use you. He sees you just as you are. And it's in your weakness, in your confusion, that His power is made perfect. Lemuel had to take a step of faith. Instead of continuing to see his land as barren and without a future, he decided to act. Sometimes we must take that step too. Perhaps right now you feel that everything is dry, that there is no fruit. Maybe you've been praying for years for an answer, for a miracle, and you haven't seen it yet. But I encourage you, like Lemuel, not to lose faith. God hasn't forgotten you. And what seems like a desert today can become fertile ground tomorrow if you trust in Him and follow His guidance. The elder Idun told Lemuel, "Your dreams are not just for you, they are an invitation from God to trust Him more deeply." Perhaps at this very moment, God is speaking to you through your circumstances. You may not understand why you're going through what you're experiencing, but there is a message in the midst of it all. Often, the greatest spiritual breakthroughs occur when we are going through the most difficult moments. God is preparing you for something greater, something you can't yet see clearly, but that will be revealed in His timing. God revealed to Lemuel that the blessing had been there all along his life, was full of purpose, even though he couldn't see it. The same is true for you. Every step you've taken, every difficult moment, every secret prayer you've prayed, it's all been part of a greater plan. And though you may not always see the full picture, God does. He has already mapped out your path and has blessings prepared for you. It's easy to feel that the dreams and visions God gives us are confusing or meaningless. But Lemuel's story reminds us that God doesn't leave us alone. He is constantly sending us signs, speaking to us even in the midst of what seems like chaos. If you feel lost, I encourage you to pause and look for the signs. God is closer than you think, and He is speaking to your life, waiting for you to respond in faith. Perhaps you're wondering how you can apply this to your life. My advice is simple: pray, trust, and act. Just like Lemuel, you must be willing to take that step of faith. Don't wait to have all the answers or to understand everything perfectly. God works through small acts of faith, through trust in what we cannot see, and when we do, He takes care of the rest. What seemed like a meaningless dream can become a divine revelation that transforms your life. So, at this moment, I invite you to reflect deeply. What dreams, what signs has God given you? Where are you seeing confusion in your life that might actually be an invitation to trust Him more? Remember, God hasn't forgotten you, and His plan for you is still unfolding even if you don't fully understand it yet. If you've made it this far, it's because God is speaking to your heart. He is calling you to a deeper relationship, to trust that His hand continues to guide your life. Like Lemuel, perhaps you find yourself in a stage of life where you feel that many things no longer make sense, or that God's promises seem to have been forgotten. Maybe you think you've gone through too many seasons of drought without seeing the fruit you were hoping for, and you wonder if there's anything left to do. But here's where I want to remind you of something powerful. God doesn't work within the limits of time as we do. No matter how many years have passed, how many times you've tried and failed, or how many seemingly confusing dreams you've had, for God, nothing is impossible. And it is never too late for His plan to come to fruition in your life. Lemuel's story teaches us that God's signs can come at the most unexpected moments and through the most unusual means, like dreams. What seemed meaningless to Lemuel was actually a divine promise. In the same way, the moments of confusion you've experienced may be filled with meaning, even if you don't understand them now. Have you ever had a dream, a vision, or even an internal sense that God was guiding you toward something, but you couldn't see how it would unfold? Perhaps that dream has repeated in your heart not as nightly images, but as a desire, a promise you know God gave you long ago. Maybe you felt called to serve in a specific way, to help others, or to see transformation in your life or family. But years have passed, and that dream still hasn't materialized. Let me tell you, as Lemuel learned it, God's dreams do not fade or disappear. They are planted in His perfect timing, waiting for the right moment to bring it to fruition. The river of gold in Lemuel's desert dream was symbolic of the blessing God had prepared for him. Perhaps in your life, that river of gold represents the promises God has planted in your heart. Those promises are not necessarily material, though it could be that God also has physical blessings for you, but often, the river of gold symbolizes spiritual abundance, the peace you've been searching for, the strength to face each new day, or the emotional and physical healing that can only come from God. Remember how, at first, Lemuel didn't understand what God was showing him. He thought the dreams were meaningless, but when he decided to seek God's wisdom through the elder Itan, he began to see that God had been speaking to him all along. The same may be true in your life. Perhaps God has already been speaking to you, guiding you, but you've been so focused on the struggles of everyday life that you haven't noticed the signs. Sometimes we're so busy trying to figure everything out on our own that we forget God already has a plan laid out for us. He is not surprised by our struggles, doubts, or failures. In fact, He patiently waits for us to turn our eyes back to Him so He can guide us. In Lemuel's story, the elder Itan helped interpret the dreams. But today, we have something even greater, the Holy Spirit, who dwells within us and guides us. He is our counselor, our helper, and He is ready to reveal the truths we need to continue on God's path. Perhaps, like Lemuel, the next step you need to take is to seek God's wisdom and direction with more intentionality. It doesn't matter how much time has passed or how many deserts you've crossed, God has something prepared for you. What you may need is a new perspective, a different way of seeing what's already happening in your life. Like Lemuel, who decided to work the seemingly barren land of his family, perhaps what God is waiting for from you is to start acting in faith, even if you don't yet see the results. Sometimes the smallest step of faith can unlock the greatest blessings. Think about the fertile field that appeared in Lemuel's final dream. That field was waiting to be cultivated. In the same way, there are fields in your life waiting for you to work them. It could be an area of your life you've neglected, or perhaps a calling you know God has placed on your heart but you haven't fully embraced. You might feel it's too late, that you've missed too many opportunities. But let me tell you, it is never too late for God. He can restore what was lost, and he can make flourish what seemed dead. And here's where I want to encourage you. Trust in God's timing. If you feel like you've been in a desert like Lemuel, trust that there is a river of blessings waiting ahead. If you feel that your dreams don't make sense, remember that God always has a purpose behind what he shows us, even if we don't understand it at first. The same God who spoke through Lemuel is the God who has given you promises and dreams. Do not ignore them. Do not underestimate them. Even if you can't yet see how everything fits together, God is at work. He is the God who transforms deserts into fertile fields, who turns confusing dreams into clear and abundant blessings. I want to invite you to pause in your daily life. Take a moment to pray, to reflect on the promises God has made in your life. Ask yourself, what areas of my life do I need to fully surrender to God? Where have I stopped dreaming, stopped expecting great things from him? Like Lemuel, it's possible that God is already at work, but you need to open the eyes of faith to see it. In the midst of your desert, keep walking, even in confusion. Keep trusting. God has a plan for you that is not yet finished, and what he has begun in your life, he will bring to full completion. If you felt in your heart that God is calling you to take a step of faith, do not ignore it. He is with you, guiding you, and what seems like a meaningless dream may actually be the beginning of something much greater. What we've been exploring up to this point goes deeper than you might imagine. It's not just an ancient story that feels distant, it has a direct connection to what you're living right now. If something has resonated in your heart throughout this reflection, it's because God is using this story to speak to you right at this moment in your life. Like Lemuel, you may find yourself facing challenges, situations you don't fully understand, or promises that seem to have stalled. Perhaps there are dreams in your heart that God has planted but that haven't yet come to pass, and that brings you uncertainty. However, let me tell you with all my heart, you are not alone. God is at work, even in those dreams that now seem to be on pause. Like Lemuel, you may be going through a desert, but I want you to remember something important. The desert is not your final destination. It is only a season in your journey toward the fulfillment of God's promises. Perhaps, like Lemuel, you are dreaming of rivers of gold blessings that seem unattainable. Maybe you wonder how those blessings can come when everything around you seems barren. But don't forget that God is a God of the impossible. What seems arid and lifeless to our eyes is fertile ground for his perfect work. One of the greatest lessons we learn from Lemuel's story is the importance of not giving up when we don't understand what God is doing. How many times do we find ourselves like him, dreaming without being able to decipher the message? How many times have we prayed and asked for answers, only to feel that heaven remains silent? But as we saw with Lemuel, God does not leave us without answers. In his time, and in ways we often don't expect, he shows us what we need to know. It's possible that in your walk, you felt discouraged because things haven't turned out as you hoped. Perhaps you've been waiting for years to see an answer to your prayers, and now you're wondering if it's still worth it to keep waiting. Maybe you feel tired, and the spiritual desert you're going through seems endless. But let me tell you something. God is with you in that desert. Just as he was with Lemuel. Don't let fatigue or frustration steal the blessing that is about to come. God is faithful, and he does not leave his children in the desert without purpose. He has a perfect plan, even when we can't see it. Think about Lemuel's patience, his willingness to listen even though he didn't fully understand what was happening. Perhaps you, too, need that patience today, that faith that trusts God despite the lack of clarity. Sometimes God calls us to walk by faith and not by sight. Sometimes he asks us to trust his plan even when we don't fully comprehend it. And when we do, when we choose to trust in the midst of uncertainty, God shows us his faithfulness in surprising ways. The elder Iton told Lemuel that the dreams were an invitation from God, not just for him, but to bless others. The same is true for you. The promises and dreams God has placed in your life are not just for your personal benefit. God is calling you to be a channel of blessing to those around you. Sometimes our dreams don't make sense to us because we're only seeing a small part of the plan. But God sees the whole picture, and he knows how our lives, our stories, and our dreams fit into his greater plan to bless others. Have you ever stopped to think that the difficulties you're facing now might be part of the testimony God wants to use to inspire others? Perhaps the blessings you haven't yet seen are not just for you, but so that through you, others may be blessed. Lemuel's story shows us that when God works, In our lives, He does so with a greater purpose. He doesn't just bless us. He uses our lives as a testimony to encourage, strengthen, and build up those around us. Perhaps, like Lemuel, all you need to do today is trust and take the next step of faith, even if you don't understand everything. You may not see how the pieces fit together, but God has already mapped out the path. Your task is not to understand it all, but to trust the one who understands everything. If He has given you a dream, a promise, or a vision, you can be sure that He will bring it to pass in His perfect timing. And while you wait, He is transforming you, strengthening you, and preparing you to receive the blessing you've longed for. Do not underestimate what God is doing in this moment. Do not despise small beginnings or times of waiting, because it is in those moments that God is doing His deepest work in you. Like Lemuel, perhaps what you need today is to open your heart and ask God to show you the next step. It is not necessary to understand everything right away. You just need to be willing to trust Him. If you're hearing these words, I want you to know it's no coincidence. God has been speaking to your life, and this is the moment when He wants you to respond in faith. It doesn't matter how long you've been waiting. It doesn't matter how confusing or difficult your desert seems. God is with you. He has not left you, and His promises are faithful and true. So, as you continue reflecting on Lemuel's story and what God is doing in your life, I encourage you not to stop here. There is much more that God wants to show you, much more that He has prepared for you. If this reflection has touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to our channel and join us daily. Every day, we share messages like this, filled with hope, faith, and encouragement, designed to strengthen your walk with God. You can listen to these messages while doing your daily tasks, while meditating, or even while resting your mind, because even if you're not consciously paying full attention all the time, your subconscious mind is absorbing these spiritual truths for your life. And your spiritual growth will be inevitable. God is working in you, even when you don't perceive it. If you feel that you can be of help to a brother or sister, I encourage you to do so in the comments. Sometimes, a simple word of encouragement can make a huge difference in someone else's life. Share your testimony, your story, or a piece of advice. God can use even the simplest words to bring hope to someone who needs it. Thank you for being here, and I hope to see you in the next videos. May God bless you abundantly. Amen.